This is a homily for the 15th Sunday in Ordinary Time. The first reading comes from the prophet Amos, chapter 7, verses 12 to 15. The Gospel for this Sunday comes from the Gospel of St. Mark, chapter 6, verses 7 to 13. In chapter 3 of Mark's Gospel, Jesus summoned those he himself wanted. In today's Gospel, from chapter 6, those whom he has summoned are now sent forth. So, Jesus summons 12 to be with him, to be sent out to proclaim the message, and to have power to drive out demons. In today's Gospel, that time has come, and the 12 are again summoned, and now they are sent out in pairs with authority over unclean spirits. The Jewish philosopher Martin Buber wrote that all revelation is a summons and a sending. Archbishop Fulton Sheen once described the rhythm of Christian life as first come, then go. We are summoned to be with Jesus as were the disciples. Then, like the disciples, we are sent forth. The prophet Amos was also summoned and sent. In today's first reading, there is a confrontation between the prophet Amos and Amaziah, the priest of the shrine at Bethel. Bethel was a royal sanctuary and an important shrine in the northern kingdom of Israel. For reasons that aren't explicitly disclosed, Amaziah doesn't want the prophet around and tells Amos to get back to the southern kingdom of Judah. Amos defends his call from God, saying that he had not chosen to be a prophet. Rather, he was chosen by God and sent to the northern kingdom. I was a shepherd and looked after sycamores, but it was the Lord who took me from herding the flock, and the Lord who said, "Go, prophesy to my people Israel." Amos was summoned and sent. The Greek verb in today's Gospel, translated here as summoned, is proskaleo, which means to call to oneself. It connotes an authoritative summons. Jesus summons 12, a highly symbolic number within Judaism. According to biblical tradition, the 12 tribes of Israel are descended from the 12 sons of Jacob. Jacob had 6 sons with his wife Leah: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. He had 2 sons with his other wife Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. Leah's servant Zilpah had 2 sons, Gad and Asher, and Rachel's servant Bilhah also had 2 sons, Dan and Naphtali. Following the conquest of Canaan, the land was distributed among the tribes, with the exception of the tribe of Levi, which was responsible for priestly functions. Under the impact of military pressures, the Israelites turned to the prophet Samuel with the request that he establish a monarchy. Saul was anointed to rule over all the tribes of Israel, and when Saul died, his son, Ishbaal, was accepted by all the tribes, with the exception of Judah and Simeon, who preferred David. David's struggle with the house of Saul ended in victory for him, and he ruled from Jerusalem over all the tribes of Israel. Following the death of David's son Solomon, the tribes once again split along territorial and political lines, with Judah and Benjamin in the south loyal to the house of David, and the rest of the tribes in the north ruled by a succession of dynasties. With the exile of the northern kingdom in 722 BC and the southern kingdom in 587 BC, the tribal structure was destroyed beyond repair. The summoning of the 12 must be seen against this background. New Testament scholar John Mayer explains, in his own person, King David welded the 12 tribes into a united kingdom about 1000 BC, but rebellion tore that unity apart. Under David's grandson Rehoboam, the kingdom split into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah in 922 BC. In the 8th century, the Assyrians invaded and destroyed the northern kingdom in 721 BC. In the biblical version of this history, the 10 northern tribes were exiled and never returned to their land. In the 6th century, Babylon invaded and overthrew the southern kingdom of Judah in 587 BC, and so for a while the nation of Israel seemed extinguished. Within half a century, though, some of the exiles from the tribes of Judah, Benjamin and Levi began returning to the former southern kingdom to start the rebuilding of Jerusalem in 538 BC. Despite the great hopes of prophets like 2nd and 3rd Isaiah, the restoration of Jerusalem and its temple was paltry and disappointing. Not surprisingly, Jews began to look forward in faith to a future in which God would gather all 12 tribes back to a restored, promised land. According to many prophecies, at the end of the days, Yahweh would recreate his people Israel as a whole. New Testament scholar Tom Wright adds this: the number 12 is itself, of course, full of meaning, as anyone in Jesus' world would recognize. At the heart of what Jesus was up to was his belief that through his work God was at last renewing and restoring Israel, which traditionally had been based upon the 12 tribes. But now the 12 were not just to be a sign that God was restoring Israel, they were to be part of the means by which he was doing so. The 12 are summoned and sent. For that reason they are called apostles, from the Greek word apostolos. The literal translation of apostolos is one sent forth. It conveys a sense of delegated and representative authority. The mission of the 12 is from Jesus and through the power of Jesus. Jesus gives the 12 specific instructions as he sends them forth. Firstly, they are to travel in pairs. In pairs, they can give reliable witness to the inbreaking of God's kingdom. The book of Deuteronomy states that 2 witnesses were required for valid testimony. But there's also another very important reason why the disciples set out in pairs along the road of discipleship, and I'll come to that in just a moment. Secondly, they are to take nothing with them for the journey except a staff. The word journey here is a translation of the Greek hodos, which means way, road, journey, or path. In Mark's Gospel, hodos also refers to the way of discipleship. If we bring together these 2 images of the 12 travelling together in pairs along the way, the hodos, we arrive at the idea of a synodal church. Pope Francis has invited us to see the church as synodal. The official logo for the ongoing Synod on Synodality portrays the image of a group of people, laity, religious and clergy, journeying together under the guidance of God's Spirit. A synodal church means, therefore, that we journey together, encountering the Lord and one another. Our English word synod comes from the Greek synodos, which in turn is made up of sun, which means together with, and hodos, which, as we've seen, means way, road, journey, or path. Pope Francis has likened the synodal church to an orchestra. Last September, during the latest consistory of cardinals, he said this: "Dear brothers and sisters, it does us good to reflect upon ourselves as the image of the orchestra, in order to learn to be an ever more symphonic and synodal church. Diversity is necessary. It is indispensable. However, each sound must contribute to the common design. This is why mutual listening is essential. Each musician must listen to the others. If one listens only to himself, however sublime his sound may be, it will not benefit the symphony. And the same would be the case if one section of the orchestra did not listen to the others, but played as if it were alone, as if it were the whole. So, a synodal church is summoned by the Lord and sent forth, and we are not sent forth alone, but with fellow disciples. Let's now return to the instructions the Lord gives the 12 as he sends them forth. The staff is both practical and symbolic. It is practical in that it helps walkers to navigate their way across uneven terrain. But the staff can also be used as a weapon against wild animals and bandits. I'll come back to the symbolism of the staff in a moment. Jesus tells the 12 to take no bread with them. They will be empowered by God, and since they are not to take any money with them, they will be totally dependent upon the generosity and hospitality of others. The Jerusalem Bible translation has no coppers. Mark uses the Greek word kalkos, which means copper. In this context, it refers to copper coins of the lowest value, which means that the apostles can't even take some small change with them. Nor are they to take a bag with them. The Greek word that Mark uses is peira, which is a leather bag or pouch for carrying provisions, especially food. Once again, the disciples have no food of their own, nor do they have any money to buy food. They are not self-sufficient and must therefore depend upon the generosity and hospitality of others. This is a telling lesson even today for anyone who wants to do things my way, for anyone who insists upon complete control over their ministry. There is one further point to make about the peira. New Testament scholar John Dominic Crossan makes this observation. The Greek term peira, which we might call a knapsack, was functionally a begging pouch. It was where itinerants kept whatever they were given. It declared and symbolized their self-sufficiency. They had all they needed on their hip. But that is precisely what Jesus' companions do not carry. They are no peira people, however that term is translated in our English texts. The 12 may wear sandals, but they are not to put on 2 tunics. Mark uses the word chiton, which is a tunic, an undergarment, usually worn next to the skin. William Barclay tells us about this garment. The innermost garment was the chiton. It was very simple. It was simply a long piece of cloth folded over and sewn down one side. It was long enough to reach almost to the feet. Holes were cut in the top corners for the arms. Such garments were commonly sold without any hole for the head to go through. That was to prove that the garment was, in fact, new, and it was to allow the buyer to arrange the neckline as he or she wished. At its simplest, then, the inner garment was little more than a sack with holes cut in the corners. In a more developed form, it had long, close-fitting sleeves. People going on journeys often wore two of these garments, perhaps for warmth at night. Theologian John Shea likens the disciples setting out to proclaim the kingdom with an American woman who called herself Peace Pilgrim. This woman, born Mildred Lisette Norman, walked across America for 30 years, teaching the importance of peace. She said, "I shall remain a wanderer until humanity has learned the way of peace, walking until I am given shelter, fasting until I am given food." Shea offers this reflection. What her shelterless and foodless condition did was allow people to be hospitable. She was always given shelter and food. She created the conditions for the goodness of people to come forth, and for them to acknowledge their deep desire to hear the message of peace. The spiritual wisdom about people and peace was not speculation. She came to it by following a path, I think, that was close to the one Jesus gives his missionary disciples. What does this gospel say to the church today? How in today's world should we interpret the command of Jesus to go forth without money or food, with only sandals, staff, and a single garment? New Testament scholar Brendan Byrne offers this insight. Today's gospel reminds the church that the effectiveness of its prophetic role, its critique of prevailing cultural assumptions and practices, will largely be in proportion to the lightness with which it travels, its trust in the goodness, hospitality of ordinary people, and the lack of self-seeking its clergy present to the world. Let's come back to the symbolism of the 12 having both staff and sandals. Here Mark introduces an Exodus motif. In the book of Exodus we find instructions for eating the Passover meal. "This is how you shall eat it, your sandals on your feet and your staff in your hand." New Testament scholar Joel Marcus explains, "The disciples will be looked after by God, and in this regard it is significant that there are strong overlaps between the Markan description of their equipment and Old Testament portrayals of the gear of the Israelites whom God led out of Egypt and sustained in the desert for 40 years. As the Markan missionaries will not need to bring bread with them, so the Israelites did not need to take bread because manna rained down on them from heaven. Let's return to Buber and Sheen. All revelation is a summons and a sending, and first come, then go. For the Christian, the summons is primary. We must first come and be with the Lord. It is only then that we are sent. Let's reflect upon the importance of the summons and the sending. Viktor Frankl was a Jewish psychiatrist in Vienna who was rounded up in 1942 by the Nazis and sent to a ghetto and then to a series of concentration camps. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl argues that the human search for meaning is a primary motivational force in each of us. He coined the term logotherapy to describe his school of psychotherapy. Logos, he explains, is a Greek word denoting meaning, and so logotherapy focuses on the meaning of human existence and on each individual's search for such a meaning. Logotherapy grew out of Frankl's experience as a prisoner in concentration camps during the Second World War. His entire family, except his sister, perished in these camps, and he lost all his possessions. The human search for meaning is not about ambition, but rather vocation. Frankl makes this observation: we should not ask ourselves what we want from life. We should ask ourselves, what does life want from us? There is a difference between the call from within and the call from outside. It is the difference between ambition and vocation. Ambition comes from the self. Vocation from something outside and larger than the self. Being human is always directed and pointing to something or someone other than oneself, to a meaning to fulfill or another human being to encounter, a cause to serve or a person to love. The Pew Research Center describes itself as a non-partisan fact tank that informs the public about the issues, attitudes, and trends shaping the world. A fact tank is the step before a think tank. The fact tank provides necessary data for a think tank. So the Pew Research Center conducts public opinion polling, demographic research, content analysis, and other data-driven social science research. In 2017, they conducted a survey tackling the question, what makes life meaningful? One of the instruments this survey employed was an open-ended question asking Americans to describe, in their own words, what makes their lives feel meaningful, fulfilling, or satisfying. The late Rabbi Jonathan Sacks comments on the findings of this survey in his book entitled Morality. He begins by making the observation that philosophers have traditionally identified the search for a meaningful life with service to a moral cause, a community, a country, or God. However, people in this survey, by contrast, tended to describe moments when they felt good about themselves. It is as if they have lost the sense of vocation, the pursuit of meaning, a calling to something larger than the self. American journalist David Brooks makes a similar point in his book, The Road to Character. He writes, "We have moved from a culture that encouraged people to think humbly of themselves to a culture that encourages people to see themselves as the centre of the universe." Brooks labels this as the big me. Life is an ego drama, and I'm playing the leading role. The only question the big me is interested in asking is, what can you do for me? In this age of autonomy, the big me makes his or her own the lines of William Ernst Henley's poem Invictus. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. And their anthem is Frank Sinatra's version of My Way. I planned each charted course, each careful step along the byway, but more, much more than this, I did it my way. Brooks contrasts the big me with what he calls the summoned self. The summoned self doesn't ask, what do I want from life? The summoned self listens and looks and asks a different set of questions. What does this environment need in order to be made whole? What is it that needs repair? What tasks are lying around waiting to be performed? At what points do my talents meet the world's deep need? In his subsequent book, The Second Mountain, Brooks takes this theme even further. As the subtitle of the book indicates, it is about the quest for a moral life. And in life, he argues, there are two mountains that we can climb, metaphorically speaking. He writes, "Every once in a while I meet a person who radiates joy. These are people who seem to glow with an inner light. I often find that their life has what I think of as a two-mountain shape. The goals on that first mountain are the normal goals that our culture endorses: to be a success, to be well thought of, to get invited into the right social circles, and to experience personal happiness. Then something happens. Some people get to the top of that first mountain, taste success, and find it unsatisfying. Is this all there is, they wonder? They sense there must be a deeper journey they can take. I now think the rampant individualism of our current culture is a catastrophe. The emphasis on self, individual success, self-fulfillment, individual freedom, self-actualization, is a catastrophe. When your life is defined by fervent commitments, you are on the second mountain." In his book To Heal a Fractured World, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks tells the story of a young Jewish university student in Britain who was halfway through an undergraduate course in philosophy. His studies had challenged his faith, and he had many questions that he needed to discuss. While on vacation, he travelled to the United States of America and sought out rabbis whose writings he had read. Throughout his travels, one name kept coming up in conversation. Time and time again he was told that he must meet one of the most revered leaders of the Jewish world, Menachem Mendel Schneerson. When he visited Rabbi Schneerson's center in Brooklyn, he told one of his disciples that he would like to meet the rabbi. The man laughed. "You and thousands of others. Every moment of the rabbi's day is full." The young British student was not deterred, and he left a contact number in the hope that he might be able to arrange a meeting before he returned home. 3 weeks later, a phone call came. "The rabbi can see you." When he was finally admitted to the rabbi's presence, the student was surprised. He had imagined that the rabbi would be a powerful, charismatic leader, but instead he met an unassuming and quietly spoken man who gave the student the impression that he was the most important person in the room. The rabbi responded to the student's questions, but then he turned the tables and began to ask the student questions. "What are you doing to strengthen Jewish life in the university where you are studying? Are you befriending other students and drawing them close?" The student was taken by surprise. He had never thought of himself as a leader, nor had he ever wanted to be one. He had sought out the rabbi in the hope that he might resolve certain questions about faith and religion. Instead, it seemed as though the rabbi was attempting to recruit him to a religious task. The rabbi became insistent. He was inviting this British student to get involved, to take the initiative and accept responsibility. The effect of the meeting was not immediate, and the student returned home to continue his studies. But the rabbi's words continued to echo in his mind. In a nutshell, the rabbi had said, "Things are going wrong. Are you willing to be one of those who helps to put them right?" The question continued to trouble him. And years later, the young man began theological studies and eventually became a rabbi, and then a teacher of rabbis, then a chief rabbi. Yes, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks was telling his own story. He had been called and challenged by a saintly rabbi who was more than a leader. He was someone who created leadership in others. The youthful Rabbi Sacks had learnt an important lesson which he summarizes in these few words: "There is no life without a task, no person without a talent, no moment without its call." In Christian terms, this means that we are all called to be apostles. When the American West was being settled, the stagecoach was the major means of transportation until the advent of rail. What is not commonly known, however, is that the stagecoach had 3 different kinds of ticket: first, second, and third class. Now, how on earth, you may ask, could you have 3 separate classes on a stagecoach? Were the first-class passengers seated comfortably inside the coach, and second and third-class passengers seated outside, perhaps on the top of the carriage? Well, that doesn't seem to have been the distinction. If you had a first-class ticket, you could remain seated in the coach no matter what happens. The second-class ticket meant this: if something happens, you have to get out of the coach and stand aside while others fix the problem. If you had a third-class ticket, it meant that if something happened, you had to get out of the coach and help fix the problem. You had to assist repairing a broken wheel, or push the coach if it got bogged down or had difficulty negotiating a steep incline. When Jesus sent the disciples out, he didn't give them first or second-class tickets. An apostle is not one who sits back while others fix the problem. Jesus sent the disciples forth to proclaim the kingdom and to cast out demons, just as you and I are called and sent. Why me? Because there is no life without a task, no person without a talent, no moment without its call. Jesus summons and seeks to send each one of us.